I saw blood on her face and on her chest. And there was a gunshot wound right in the middle of her chest.
She was shot in the lower chest region, and that caused a lot of internal bleeding. And that's what finally killed her.
This was a brutal murder. This was not somebody who came in, stumbled upon somebody, shot them, and ran out. This is somebody who shot Debbie and then choked Debbie and beat Debbie, and it was very, very brutal.
On Saturday, August 6, 1977, a horrifying discovery was made in a quiet residential neighborhood in Miami, Florida. Inside a home, police officers found the lifeless body of a young woman lying on a bed, brutally murdered. The bed was soaked in blood, and the crime scene told a story of unimaginable violence. The victim had clearly been beaten severely before being shot in the chest. The bullet wound appeared to be the fatal blow, though her body also bore multiple other injuries, indicating a prolonged and merciless assault.
The crime scene itself was isolated to the bedroom, and that's where the victim's body was. It's possible that the offender in this case obtained the firearm from her purse and ultimately shot her, and in this case beat her.
The weapon used, a firearm, was found broken on the bed where she lay. The victim was identified as 23-year-old Debbie Clark, a dedicated ICU nurse working at Coral Gables Hospital. She had come to Miami with dreams and ambitions, hoping to build a meaningful career and life. But on that fateful day, all of her aspirations were extinguished in a moment of senseless violence.
My sister Debbie was a typical small city girl that wanted to lead a different life. She was a nurse. She moved to Miami to start a new life.
Debbie had been married to a man named Phil since 1973. After their marriage, Debbie moved to Miami, driven by her deep passion for nursing. Soon after relocating, she secured a job at Coral Gables Hospital, a significant achievement for her. Although she had chosen to pursue her personal dreams, there were no indications of trouble in her marriage. Debbie and Phil were not separated, nor was there any talk of divorce. Their relationship appeared stable, and Phil supported her ambition. At the hospital, Debbie had a co-worker and close friend named Ms. LaRusso. These two women used to spend time together, even outside of work, and shared a bond beyond that of ordinary colleagues. Ms. LaRusso worked the morning shift from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., while Debbie's shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. the next day. On Thursday, August 4, 1977, Ms. LaRusso saw Debbie returning home from her night shift around 7 a.m., but when the night shift began later that day at 11 p.m., Debbie failed to show up for work, which immediately struck Ms. LaRusso as unusual. Debbie was known for her dedication and punctuality. She never missed a shift without informing someone. Concerned, Ms. LaRusso decided to visit Debbie's home the next day, on August 5th. Normally, if they needed to communicate, they would simply call each other. But this time, there had been no phone call, no message. When Ms. LaRusso arrived at Debbie's house, she received no answer at the door. Initially, she thought perhaps Debbie had gone out. However, her concern deepened when she noticed Debbie's car was still parked in the driveway. Debbie never left without her car. Later that day, Debbie again failed to report for her shift. The same thing happened on August 6th. At this point, Ms. LaRusso's worry turned into fear. Debbie had now been out of touch and absent from work for nearly 3 days, completely out of character for her. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Ms. LaRusso returned to Debbie's house on August 6th. Once again, she found no sign of Debbie and no response at the door. Overwhelmed with concern, she contacted the police and explained the entire situation. At approximately 7:30 a.m., Officer T. Guafoyle arrived at Debbie Clark's residence. Ms. LaRusso was already present, trying to make sense of the situation. After surveying the home, it became evident to Officer Guafoyle that all doors and windows were securely locked from the inside.
The first thing to do is look for signs of a burglary or a forced entry. All the doors were locked, no windows were broken, no windows were open, no signs of forced entry. I know how to climb things, and it was really my only option. I got to the balcony with the sliding glass door.
When he made his way upstairs and managed to open a window, he was met with a chilling sight. Debbie's lifeless body lay on the bed. The air conditioner in the room was running at a very low temperature, keeping the environment unusually cold. Bloodstains were visible across the bed, and a single gunshot wound was located in the center of Debbie's chest.
This was a brutal murder. This was not somebody who came in, stumbled upon somebody, shot them, and ran out. This is somebody who shot Debbie and then choked Debbie and beat Debbie, and it was very, very brutal.
Her face bore signs of multiple injuries, indicating that she had been beaten severely before she was killed. Despite the gruesome scene, the rest of the house showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to be broken or tampered with. Debbie's purse was found near her body, but it was empty. Investigators also discovered divorce papers on a nearby shelf legal documents between Debbie and her estranged husband, Phil. Next to the body was a broken handgun. Shockingly, it was later confirmed that the weapon belonged to Debbie herself, and it was the same gun used to end her life.
Then they processed the clothing, the bed sheets. They turned her over. That's when we saw the gun grips.
It's possible that the offender in this case obtained the firearm from her purse and ultimately shot her, and in this case beat her. And beat her so bad that the gun grips literally broke off the firearm.
As the investigation progressed, friends of Debbie informed officers that she usually kept a gun for personal safety. They also mentioned that some of Debbie's belongings, including jewelry and her handbag, appeared to be missing from the home. A few days into the investigation, detectives uncovered what could be a crucial piece of evidence: a single strand of hair found on Debbie's hand.
One of the crime scene technicians spotted a hair on her arm, but it was such a small hair.
However, in the 1970s, forensic science had not advanced enough to conduct DNA testing, so determining the identity of the hair's owner wasn't possible. As a result, the hair was not considered a decisive lead at the time, and investigators continued pursuing other angles. Debbie's autopsy revealed several injuries across her body, including on the left side of her head, neck, and center of the chest.
The medical examiner's autopsy revealed that Debbie hadn't just been shot. If it was just a burglar, they might have just shot her, right? Or they wouldn't have had a gun and they would have just beat her. But in this case, it was both. And that kind of indicates a level of intimacy, a level of it being personal between the killer and the decedent.
While the head and neck wounds were serious, they were not fatal. The bullet wound in the chest, however, proved deadly. The bullet had entered from one side and exited the other, causing significant blood loss that ultimately led to her death. The news of Debbie's murder eventually reached her parents, who were devastated.
I get the phone call. They found Debbie dead. And she'd been dead, like 3 days. She had been murdered, and I couldn't believe it. Debbie's mother was very overwhelmed when the detectives told her that she had been murdered.
Though Debbie did not come from a wealthy background, her family had always tried to support her pursuit of a better life. When investigators asked Debbie's father if she had any known enemies, he stated that she didn't, at least not to his knowledge. However, he did mention Debbie's estranged husband, Phil. The couple had not finalized their divorce and were still legally married at the time of her death. Debbie's father also revealed the name of another man who had become part of her life after she moved to Miami: Alan Bregman. Alan was from a wealthy family and owned several apartments and hotels in the Miami area. He had already been introduced to Debbie's family, who had taken a strong liking to him. Alan was charming, well-mannered, and seemingly perfect.
Everybody in the family really liked Alan. He was personable, he was gracious, friendly, he had money. He was a big real estate mogul.
It was possible, her parents believed, that Debbie saw in Alan the promise of a luxurious life, a life she had always dreamed of. Their relationship appeared to be serious, and her parents had no objections to it. As the investigation continued, more information about Alan Bregman began to surface, information that complicated the case even further. It turned out that Alan was already married and had a child. Despite this, he had introduced Debbie to his children, suggesting their relationship had grown quite serious. According to those close to them, Alan and Debbie had decided to divorce their respective partners so they could marry each other. Debbie appeared fully committed to building a life with Alan. The two would often travel together, exploring new places and spending significant time in each other's company. In fact, Debbie's divorce from Phil was scheduled just 1 week before her untimely death. an indication that she was preparing to move forward with Alan permanently. Divorce papers were found near Debbie's body during the initial search of the crime scene, reinforcing the timeline and seriousness of her plans. At this point, suspicion was still focused heavily on Phil, Debbie's estranged husband. Investigators brought him in for questioning, hoping to uncover inconsistencies or a possible motive. Phil told officers that at the time of Debbie's murder, he had been in New York State. He further explained that the divorce was not the result of any major conflict. Both he and Debbie had mutually agreed to it. His alibi was confirmed, and nothing in his statement suggested deception or resentment. With no solid evidence linking him to the murder, investigators began to believe that Phil was not involved. The focus now shifted squarely to Alan Bregman. To follow this lead, detectives visited Alan's residence. However, when the door opened, it wasn't Alan who greeted them. It was his wife, Honey Bregman. When the investigators informed her that they were there to speak with Alan about Debbie Clark's murder, Honey appeared visibly upset, her demeanor suggesting that she already knew about Alan's affair with Debbie and that it had deeply hurt her.
Honey had recently found out about the relationship that Alan was having with Debbie. Was this a murder that occurred because Honey was upset with the other woman?
They said, we're here to investigate the homicide of a Deborah Clark. The subject's wife got up and walked out of the room with a very upset look on her face.
A few days later, investigators were finally able to speak with Alan directly. When asked where he was on the day of Debbie's murder, August 6th, Alan stated that he had been attending a Coast Guard auxiliary training at a school in New York. The program had been scheduled from August 1st through August 6th. To support his claim, Alan provided airline ticket receipts that confirmed his travel dates. The documentation matched the timeline and placed him hundreds of miles away from the crime scene. This significantly weakened the case against him. Investigators turned their attention to Honey Bregman. She had been in Miami at the time of the murder. Her emotional reaction to the mention of Debbie and her presence in the city made her a person of interest. However, during questioning, Honey revealed something unexpected. She mentioned a man named Ray Sobel. Ray was the caretaker of the apartment building where Debbie was murdered. Importantly, he had access to the property, including the keys to Debbie's unit. When officers considered Honey's background, she was a school teacher, and records showed she had been at work on the day of the murder. They began to believe she was less likely to have been involved. But Ray Sobel, on the other hand, had the opportunity, the access, and perhaps even a motive that had yet to be uncovered.
He's someone that maybe doesn't have a direct motive to want to harm Debbie, but this is someone that works for the Bregmans, that wants to keep working for the Bregmans. It was something they could not discount, that he was doing this on behalf of someone else in the Bregman family.
Did Ray Sobel know what had happened? Possibly. Did he have an involvement in it? Possibly.
This new lead shifted the direction of the investigation once again, and Ray Sobel became the next primary suspect. One possibility investigators couldn't ignore was that Alan Bregman may have orchestrated Debbie's murder by hiring Ray Sobel. However, without any direct evidence, they couldn't legally detain Ray. As the investigation progressed, shocking new revelations came to light, ones that hinted at a more calculated motive. It was discovered that 5 months before her death, on April 1st, 1977, Debbie had applied for a life insurance policy through Allstate Insurance. The policy was worth $148,000, a substantial sum at the time. Initially, she had listed her 2 younger sisters as the beneficiaries, a reflection of her role as the eldest sibling and her deep concern for their future. The policy was approved a month later on May 1st, 1977, shortly after Debbie moved to Miami. What raised serious red flags was a request Debbie reportedly received just 5 weeks before her death. Alan had asked her to change the policy's beneficiary to his name. He told her that if anything ever happened to her, he would use the insurance money to cover the costs of the condominium they had discussed living in together. For reasons unknown, perhaps love, trust, or pressure, Debbie agreed and changed the beneficiary on her life insurance policy from her sisters to Alan Bregman. But the shocking thing is that just 2 days after Debbie's murder, on August 8, 1977, Alan filed a claim with the insurance company to collect the money. This was quite different because why would a man from a wealthy family, who already had considerable assets and whose father was reportedly extremely rich, be so eager to claim $148,000?
5 weeks before the murder, Alan convinced Debbie, if you put your insurance in my name and something happens to you, I will get the condo and it'll be paid for.
The beneficiary had been changed from a sister to Alan Bregman.
Debbie was found murdered on a Saturday, and Alan went and called the life insurance company trying to collect the money on Monday.
What could have driven such urgency, especially so soon after the murder of someone he claimed to care about? As the investigation unfolded, more cracks appeared in Alan's personal life. His wife, Honey Bregman, had already discovered his affair with Debbie. Not long after Debbie's death, Honey confronted Alan and made the decision to file for divorce. Ironically, had Debbie still been alive, this turn of events might have played in Alan's favor, removing the final barrier to his relationship with Debbie. But with Debbie gone, investigators began to wonder. Soon after, Alan was brought in for another round of questioning. This time, his tone had changed. During the interview, Alan attempted to minimize his involvement with Debbie. He denied ever having a romantic relationship with her and claimed there was no emotional connection between them. He admitted to a single physical encounter, but insisted it meant nothing and certainly wasn't evidence of a motive for murder. He also denied ever staying in an apartment with Debbie, contradicting earlier reports and raising further suspicion. His sudden change in story, coupled with his eagerness to claim the life insurance money, made investigators even more suspicious. But they were facing a critical obstacle. This was the late 1970s. At the time, forensic technology was still in its infancy. DNA testing as we know it today didn't exist, and investigators had to rely almost entirely on physical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and confessions. Despite their suspicions, they simply didn't have the hard evidence needed to arrest or charge anyone with Debbie's murder. After months of investigation, countless interviews, and numerous dead ends, the case began to stall. With no concrete leads, no solid forensic proof, and too many unanswered questions, the case was quietly closed, unresolved. Years turned into decades, but the truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried by time. Eventually, with advancements in forensic science and DNA technology, the Debbie Clark case was reopened, and this time investigators had tools their predecessors never dreamed of. They hoped that with modern methods and a fresh look at the evidence, they could finally answer the question that had haunted everyone since that day in August 1977. By March 17, 2015, it had been 37 years since Debbie Clark's murder. Her family had long given up hope that justice would ever be served. Over the years, time had eroded any remaining optimism, and so had the loss of key people involved. Honey Bregman, one of the original suspects, had died in 2004. But everything changed when the case was reopened by a new team of investigators from the Homicide Bureau.
Back in 1977, they had no idea what DNA was. We wanted to see what physical evidence we still had in our possession that we can test with current technology today.
Now, with modern forensic tools and digital databases, even cold cases once thought unsolvable could be cracked open. Alan Bregman, now 75 years old, was still alive. So was Ray Sobel, the former caretaker of Debbie's apartment building. Of the original 3 persons of interest, only these 2 were still living. The third, Honey, was now just a name in the files, her death permanently removing her from the reach of justice. Investigators revisited the physical evidence collected in 1977. At the time, it had offered little help. No usable DNA had been recovered, and the case had relied heavily on witness statements and circumstantial clues. But technology had come a long way. Now, with modern DNA profiling, even a single hair or latent fingerprint could prove decisive. But before diving into the evidence, detectives began by interviewing the surviving suspects, starting with Ray Sobel. Ray Sobel was now living in a trailer park in Naples, Florida. Investigators paid him a visit, hoping he could answer one vital question. He told them that Alan had been attending a search and rescue program at the New York City Coast Guard School, but he returned to Miami on August 4th, not August 7th, as Alan had claimed during the original investigation. Investigators pulled Alan's old airline ticket, which had shown a return date of August 7th, 1977. They took the ticket to Miami airport authorities and discovered that the ticket had been falsified. The records proved Alan had, in fact, returned on August 4th, the very day of the murder. Alan had changed the date of the ticket from 4th to 7th so that no one would get suspicious.
They knew every code that was written on that ticket, knew what the change codes meant. Alan changed his airline ticket.
What we discovered was he changed his date of arrival from Sunday to Thursday. And that's when we believe the murder took place.
To build a stronger case, detectives reconnected with Debbie's friends, especially those who had attended a small party at her apartment on August 2nd, 1977. just 2 days before her death. They revealed startling details that hadn't been emphasized before. When shown crime scene photos from the day of the murder, her friends noticed several things missing. A collage of photographs that had been on the apartment walls during the party was gone. In fact, none of the wall decorations remained, despite clear memories and photographs from the party showing framed pictures on nearly every wall. Even Debbie's clothes, which had been visible in her bedroom closet, had vanished. This pointed to one clear possibility. The killer had attempted to remove personal items after the murder, possibly to conceal Debbie's identity or remove emotional traces of her presence. These facts, combined with the evidence about Alan's falsified travel date, significantly deepened suspicions.
One of the other things that her friends remember is that Alan's clothing was still present in the closet.
Investigators now felt they were closing in on the truth. All clues were now pointing directly at Alan Bregman. Investigators decided to take a fresh look at Debbie's autopsy report, hoping to uncover something the original 1977 investigation may have overlooked, or something that couldn't be interpreted with the science of the time. The autopsy revealed that Debbie had suffered injuries to her neck and the left side of her head. The nature of the wound suggested a struggle had taken place. This wasn't a quiet, calculated killing. She had fought back. On her neck, there were abrasions and contusions, and embedded in one of the wounds was a distinct ring-shaped impression. That meant one thing. The killer had been wearing a ring when they struck her.
The original medical examiner who conducted the autopsy actually recognized a patterned injury on the left side of her neck. The pattern was reminiscent of a ring. Whoever was wearing that ring was striking her, was beating her with it.
When investigators reviewed photographs of Alan from 1977, they noticed something chilling. Alan had worn a ring on his right hand matching the shape and positioning of the injury. This piece of visual evidence only added to the suspicion that Alan had been involved in the physical altercation that led to Debbie's death. Further examination of the crime scene photos and records revealed another crucial detail. A heavy glass ashtray, weighing approximately 1.6 pounds, had been found in Debbie's apartment. The back of Debbie's skull showed injuries consistent with blunt force trauma, and the ashtray was now believed to be the murder weapon. Even more damning, the ashtray had fingerprints on it. But it was the DNA evidence that would finally bring the truth into sharp focus. That hair sample was sent to a modern forensic lab for DNA analysis, and the result, a perfect match to Alan Bregman.
I was looking at his behavior. He played the role of almost like a victim. How dare we investigate him?
We got a phone call saying his DNA matched.
First at 6, cold case arrest nearly 40 years after a South Florida nurse is brutally beaten and shot and killed. Her accused killer is now in custody. 75-year-old Alan Bregman.
For the officers and Debbie's long grieving family, it was a moment of vindication and profound emotion. After nearly 4 decades of unanswered questions, justice had finally caught up with the killer.
Just where your heart is until you hear those words. It's just such a glorious feeling.
In 2016, authorities issued an arrest warrant for 75-year-old Alan Bregman. He was charged with second-degree murder. In 2019, the case went to trial. Armed with forensic evidence, timeline inconsistencies, and motive, prosecutors made their case. The jury found Alan guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. After 42 long years, Debbie Clark finally received the justice she deserved.